Thank you. Welcome to the Wayland Library. I'm Andy Moore. I'm the Assistant Director. We're very excited this afternoon to have Judith Pratt here to share her new novel. Is it Siljeea?
Siljeea, yes.
Siljeea Magic. Judith has been an actor, director, theater professor, journalist, critic, and playwright. She has recently turned to writing stories and novels, including The Dry Country and now Siljeea Magic. Her plays have been produced in Ithaca, New York City, Boston, Philadelphia, Kansas City, Missouri, Austin, Texas, and Cape Town, South Africa, and have received readings at Edward Albee's Great Plains Theater Conference and the Last Frontier Theater Conference and Wayland's own Volks Theater.
Where
She is a Wayland native.
this man played Uncle Ralph in my show.
Ralph, yes. As a director, her most recent projects included The Mikado and Princess Ida for the Cornell Savoyards. As an actor, recent roles have included Flute/Thisbe in Pyramus and Thisbe, the most tragical history of the Pyramus.
Right.
In A Midsummer Night's Dream, and Margaret and Arthur Bicknell's My Great Dead Sister. Thank you to Judith for including us on your Massachusetts trek. Please join me in welcoming her to the library.
Thank you. Thank you. What I've done here is cut together a few of the scenes from Siljeea Magic with introductory bits. So I will just start reading, and then I'll give you a little time to ask questions, and then I have more to read if you would like that. Siljeea Magic is told in the voice of Andrea. Andrea is 12. Hi. How horrible was the traffic? That's really, you made it. Thank you. So Andrea's 12, and she's the narrator of this book. Her mother works at home on her own computer. Her stepfather works all the time at his computer business. Andrea has a 5-year-old brother, Jake, who is, of course, a pain. Andrea likes to read books, and she particularly likes to read books about heroes who save the world or save the kingdom. Andrea's family moves to a big new house in the country, a house on a street full of big new houses. And she has to start a new school in the middle of the year. She doesn't make any friends. To get away from her brother and to find a place to read in peace, Andrea discovers a path into the woods behind their house and into a beautiful grove of pine trees. Here's Andrea. These woods seemed huge to me. I was used to streets, sidewalks, tiny lawns, carefully tended playgrounds. The path had disappeared, but I didn't care. I'd found my new reading spot, my escape. Sitting down with my back against a smooth pine tree trunk, I pulled out my book, set my apple beside me, and started to read. Something made me look up. A small person stood there, just at the edge of the trees and brush that lined my pine grove. I'd seen these people when we drove along highways to visit my grandmother at her condo. But I never thought they could be real. The small person wore an ancient t-shirt that had once been blue. Now most of the color had faded away, as if someone had left the shirt out in the sun for months. The shirt stretched tightly over a muscled chest. And unless these people were completely different from humans, he was male. His jeans were just as faded as his shirt, and the jeans were cut off raggedly at the knee. He was short, a little over 4 feet tall. His feet were bare, with too many toes. Determinedly not looking at his feet, I met his eyes. They were brightly dark, a little too big for his pointed nose and chin. A shock of dusty brown hair stood up around his head. What I'd taken for brown skin while watching these people from the car turned out to be a kind of deep tan color, covered with very soft hair, like the almost invisible fuzz that grew on Jake's head when he was a baby. This person's skin and hair matched the rusty brown pine needles at his feet, the feet with the extra toes. Very slowly, I picked up my apple and held it out to him as if he were a wild animal. His eyes followed my every move. Gently, I rolled the apple toward him. He stepped forward, picked it up, and stepped back into the shelter of the trees all in one graceful flow. He smelled the apple, took a bite, and smiled at me. Erau, he said, hand pointing to chest. Andrea, I said, pointing to myself. You do see me. I wasn't too sure I did see him. Maybe I'd read too many stories. Yes, I said. Nayach, they do not see us. Oh, Maya, Nayach, he said, correcting my pronunciation. Yes, you are. I am a Bokaaj. Do the Bokaaj live in these woods? Yes. He tilted his head from side to side, whatever that meant. Always we live in the Bezois near the Nayach. How could I be imagining this? I tried to write stories, like the ones I love to read. They were awful. I never in a million years could I imagine someone like this. I think I always saw you, I said, when I was younger, driving. Did this make sense to him? Driving on the big road, I gestured in the direction of the highway that bordered the woods. You do sit here to find us. No. I thought I imagined you, that you weren't real. I'm still not sure you're real. Slowly, as if I were the wild animal, Erau walked over to me, sat down next to me, put his hand on my arm. It felt warm, and it had the usual 5 fingers. Both are real, he told me, each of us. Always I have wanted to meet Nayach. Never before has one seen us. I put my hand on his arm, on the soft, fine hair. I could smell him now, leaves, rain, a faint odor of sweat. Fantasies didn't have smells, did they? His teeth were white and slightly pointed. But his ears were not pointed. They were as ordinary as my ears. Any forest being I'd ever read about had pointed ears. He would have pointed ears if he were my imagination. Then I took in what he said. Never? If no one ever saw the Bokaaj, why could I see them? Never an argument, he said. I know not of others. Okay, with these woods, Bezois, too many new words. You do have booken, he said, touching a page of my discarded paperback with a reverent finger. I love books. I do read, he said proudly, magazine brought by the Immonen. Who are the Immonen? That word I could at least pronounce. Erau explained that the Bokaaj have a group who forages for them from the dumpsters and those little malls that have fast food restaurants and dry cleaning places. They find clothes like the one that Erau was wearing, and they find books and magazines so they can learn about the Nayach. Explaining all this took long enough so that the sun had almost set. Mom would be wondering where I was. I have to go, I said. Can we meet again? Sunrise, sunfall, our best times, he said. Tomorrow was Saturday. Sunrise tomorrow, I told him. If he wasn't there, then I imagined the whole thing and could go back to my boring life. Andrea keeps meeting with Erau, as she calls him. She learns how to eat ferns, you know, the little fieldheads. She learns how to bury acorns so they'll soften enough to eat. She learns how to climb trees. She also learns, this is important, that nodding your head yes is insulting to the Bokaaj. They tilt their head to say yes. Nodding means that you are the kind of person that falls asleep and endangers everyone. Andrea loves the woods, but then some bulldozers appear at the end of the road where the path into the woods begins. Andrea's stepfather explains happily that their road will be expanded into the woods with a lot more new houses. When Andrea tells Erau this, he says, "The Hult will rage." The Hult, he explains, is their leader. This Hult hates the idea of moving. Erau says that he may not be able to meet every day now. For a whole week, Erau didn't appear. I went out every morning looking for him, wondering how long I'd still be able to wander around the woods before they filled up with houses. One morning, I got there when it was still dark, even before the birds started their morning cheeping. In between cursing the bulldozers, I was cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. Then I tripped over something, almost landing on my face. That got me to stop cursing and pay attention to the dark woods. I mean, I'd never been out here when it was so dark. How early was it? Too early, I decided, and started back. Someone grabbed my arm. I kicked, I scratched, I bit the fingers. But another one swept my legs out from under me, and someone else sat on me and tied my hands, 3 of them, all smelling like dirt and sweat. They jammed a smelly bag over my head. They picked me up. One carried my shoulders and one my feet, bouncing me horribly. The bag got in my mouth, tasting like spoiled meat smells. The combination made me feel sick. I gritted my teeth to keep from throwing up. After a couple of forevers, they set me on my feet, grabbed my shoulders, and pushed me along in front of them down some kind of hill. When I stumbled and fell, there was cold dirt under my fingers, but I was scooped up and pushed along, forced to keep moving. For what felt like hours, we walked down a long slope. We hadn't climbed a fence or crossed a road or the highway, and those were the only ways into the woods. But we'd walked and run for such a long time that we had to be far beyond the forest that Erau and I had explored. The ground flattened out. We walked a little more, then stopped. One of my captors pulled the nasty bag from my head. Trying to spit out the taste, I blinked in reddish light. We stood in a cave. The walls were rock, lit by torches and by a fire pit in the center of the room. It looked like something out of the stories that I love so much. I did not love this. A group of the Bokaaj gathered at the far end of the space where a man sat in a large wooden chair. Behind the man stood an older woman, taller than any of the other Bokaaj. Her clothes were pale, almost white. Her thatch of hair was mostly gray. She was beautiful and frightening. I couldn't stop looking at her. "Halt, I bring the Naiach," said a voice behind me, and I was pushed to my knees. "Naiach, you will look at me." I stared up at the man in the big chair. Although he was definitely one of the Bokaaj, he had huge shoulders that looked even bigger because of his bushy beard. He glowered at me out of little glittering eyes. "Naiach," he rumbled again, making the word sound like a curse. Even his voice was big. "You have seduced Erau. You have told him lies." I must be dreaming, I thought. My mouth felt dry and sticky like it does when I sleep too long. I'm having a nightmare. "Oh, don't be silly," I said. "I couldn't seduce anyone. What kind of lies do you think I've told?" Behind me, one of my captors gasped and pushed me flat onto the dirt. "Speak not such Alhaven to our Hult," he growled. This nightmare refused to give up. I tried to spit dirt out of my mouth, but had no saliva to spit with. I climbed to my feet, hoping that the movement would wake me up. What the heck do you want?" I said. My captor spun me around and slapped me. My dream monsters had never slapped me. Slaps were supposed to wake you up. But I was still in the cave, sitting in the dirt, with my face stinging and my jaw hurting. "Vask," said the Hult, "bring it to me." Vask, the one who'd slapped me, dragged me to the feet of the Hult. "You will not meet Erau, said the Hult. "You will not tell lies about our land. Swear." My mouth was too full of blood and dirt for me to speak. Without thinking, I nodded my head. People screamed. The Hult roared and jumped off his chair. Vask grabbed my arms and held me while the Hult came down from his throne and put his face close to mine. His teeth were yellow, and his breath smelled awful. "Udask," he said. "Gotaz." Okay, this is not a nightmare. This is horribly real, and these people are going to kill me. But then the Hult froze. The tall woman had come forward. "This is not wise," she said. "If you hurt or steal a Naiach child, hunters do come to our bezoar night and day." "They cannot see us." "This Naiach child does see us." "Erau is your grandson. He may have some of your Siljeea magic." "A boy? Boys never have such skill." She turned to Vask with a cold smile that made me shiver. "Your face bleeds," she said. "Did the Naiach child see you close enough to scratch you?" Vask clearly didn't want to answer. The Siljeea stepped toward him and his fellow kidnappers. One of them cracked and started to talk. I didn't blame him. This woman had power. "She did see us. She did. She did run away and fight," the kidnapper blurted. The Siljeea looked at me, and I knew why he tattled. Her eyes saw right through to the back of my soul. "Who have you told of the Bokaaj?" "No one," I mumbled through my sore mouth. The Siljeea picked up a wonderful cup of water and gave it to me. "Who have you told?" she asked when I had rinsed out the dirt and swallowed the rest of the water. "No one. If I did tell anyone, they wouldn't believe me. They'd think I was crazy. They'd lock me up." As I thought. The Hult was still furious. "She seduced your grandson into showing our bezoar. She insulted me." "Did you do this?" The Siljeea looked at me. Some of my fear translated itself into rage. Erau came to look at me, and when I saw him, he wanted to be friends. I said, I didn't mean an insult. We say yes differently from you, and you hurt me until I couldn't think. Go ahead, keep me here and see what happens to your bezoar. Then I glared. Oh, heaven must be punished, Siljeea, the Holt said. With that head turn, what said you? She asked me. I will not tell Erau lies. After all, I hadn't told him lies, and I didn't plan to. The Siljeea turned her calm and terrible gaze on the Holt. Satisfied, are you, Ube? She asked him in a tone that insisted the answer had better be yes, ma'am. Away, Vask, he said, waving a fat arm. Take her. Vask was picking up the bag to put over my head again when the Siljeea kicked it away. Muzzled, all of you, she said. I will take her. The Holt opened his mouth. Do not be hulpak, Wubba, she said. Do you wish our woods to be filled with searchers day and night? They cannot see us, said the Holt, but he sounded like Jake when Mom scolds him, a combination of scared and defiant. They can frighten the animals, crush the plants, make it hard for the Immonen to move around them, said the Siljeea. We will go hungry. A muttering rose among the other Bokaaj. The Holt frowned it into silence, which thickened around us. Take her, he said, finally. The Siljeea took my hand, leading me out of the big cave room and up the long hill that led down to the Bokaaj kingdom. Head aching, mouth throbbing, I plodded along behind her. And suddenly we were outside, back in the woods. The summer sunrise blinded me, making my eyes tear, and then I was crying. The Siljeea sat me down on a rock and produced an ordinary plastic bottle of water. First, I was crying too hard to even take a sip. After I stopped sobbing, I drank it in about 3 swallows, fished in my pocket for a tissue to blow my nose, and looked around. Around us were rocks as tall as our 2-story house. I thought Erau and I had explored the whole woods, but I'd never seen any rocks, alone huge ones like these. No one sees our rocks who cannot see us, said the Siljeea. Even then, I hide us. You have been near here many times without seeing the rocks. Wubba forgets these things. He fears for his power. I felt a little better because of the water and because the big evil Holt had a stupid name. Wubba, I thought to myself. Wubba. My terror receded another few inches. Oh, Erau, I said, will he be okay? He will be sent to another jument. Boys go when they have 14 years. He will go only a little early. Boys go to learn from others and to find mates. Now we must return you, she said. Ugh, my parents, I said. They can't see me like this, all these scratches. I can never explain it. Worry not. Walk. She held out her hand. We walked through the woods. I had a million questions, but I didn't want to ask any of them because my mouth hurt. Well, not as much as it did. My head didn't hurt anymore either. And there was our house. She had led me to the fence along our backyard. After Erau's climbing lessons, getting over the fence was no problem. I felt much better. From the other side of the chain links, the Siljeea smiled at me. You will sleep now, she said. I curled up under a rhododendron bush and conked out. My mom believed my explanation that I'd gone out for an early walk and fallen asleep in the grass. It helped that my cuts had healed or disappeared. I had discovered that real fantasy was difficult and dirty. I'd also discovered that I was not a hero. A hero would have had a talisman that made the Holt listen to her. A hero would have remembered that a nod meant you are an idiot. The path I used had been taken over by huge yellow machines and workers in yellow hard hats. My pine grove was gone. Erau was gone. That's the beginning of Siljeea Magic, and thank you. What would you like to know about writing, about the book, about, writing that you do? There, in the back, yes.
What audience did you write it for?
I think of it as an audience of about Andrea's age. But I admit that I don't have children. And unfortunately, Andrea showed up. And she was going to tell me your story, and I'm going, kid. But once it was written, I thought, well, I guess those are the people that would read it. I will say, though, not only did I write to all of the middle school teachers in Wayland, but my mother kindly brought them a flyer. And where are they? Stuck in traffic. That's right. Sue.
Well, I wondered, when was the moment when this inspiration to write this came to you? I mean, did Andrea just show up in the laundry room one day? When did
No.
you know? I got to write this.
Actually, the Bokaaj showed up.
In the laundry room?
In the laundry room. No. I live in Ithaca, New York, and I drive the Massachusetts Turnpike to come visit here. And you're driving. There's woods all along the pike. And in some cases, you can see houses behind them, and in some cases, you can't see anything. And I said, who lives here? And then, small people live in the woods. And then I had to say, well, what do they do and how do they live? And who could possibly see them? Because I don't really want to just tell a story about small people. And that was when I realized that really only a kid would see them, And so I said, who's the kid? And Andrea said, I am. And I never really know where all this comes from. I mean, I knew where the initial idea came from, and then you start asking questions. Who sees them? How do they live? Who are her parents? What are her parents like? What kind of house does she live in? And as you answer the questions, you find a story. But I will say, and Sue is also a writer, so she knows this, some stories I just sort of think, well, that could be a story. And other stories show up and go, you will tell me. You will tell me now. And, anybody who has kids, you get on the phone. Mom. Yeah. Anything else? Do I remember?
Do you remember if I read to you when you were a child?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And I can repeat some of the poems, but I will spare you that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think there was a point, I don't remember learning how to read. So I think you read to me, and I looked at the books, and I looked at the pictures, and then I started reading them. And then I showed up in first grade, and the teachers were all sort of annoyed, but yeah. I knew they had to speak, I knew they had other language and therefore would turn things inside out. And I said, where did they come from? What are they doing here? And I poked around in, I mean, the Native Americans have various of the tribes have various critters, but none of them are like the Bokaaj. But they are like the brownies and the pixies and the boggarts from Europe. So at that point I said, well, they somehow hitchhiked, you know, with the Mayflower and that stuff. And then I started, names are very important in books like this. So I spend an enormous time on Google Translate. You know, how do you say king in 16 different languages, and what do I like? I particularly like some of the really odd Germanic languages, and Finnish is really good because it's nothing like anything. and Catalan, what's the other one? Anyway, Basque. That's another language that's sort of like, you know, where does it come from? And so I poke around, and then I said, all right, I kind of know who these people are, and I will mutilate actual words and turn them into words that sound good. How many nouns? Yeah. You need more verbs. This is my husband, and he says things like, I'm saying, this is too long, and he says, well, cut out all the nouns. Thanks, honey.
Do you write when you get the inspiration or the urge, or do you write at a disciplined time every day?
I'm more of an inspirational writer. If a story takes me, then I tend to write a lot. And oddly enough, my good writing time is in the late afternoon. I'm not a morning person. And I didn't really, well, that's not true. I wrote my first play when I was still working and wasn't retired. And so then that would be afternoon and evening. But then I retired, and so I can follow the, this story is pulling me, so I have to write it thing.
We have a daughter who has been a writer from very young, and she writes very early in the morning. She unfortunately doesn't share her writing. So we have no idea what we look like in her.
Oh, what do you look like, Mom? Yeah.
But she's into poetry now, so we read some.
Oh, she does share her poems.
She shared her poems. It took 50-some-odd years, but she shared one with us.
I'm impressed because I write secret poems because they make me a better writer of novels and plays, but I am not a poet, and I'm always impressed with people who are. I just scatter my stuff. Well, you know what it is? I started out as an actor. So, perform. But as an actor, it's like, look at me, look at my writing, you know. Or as Tom Stoppard writes about the players in Hamlet, we're actors. We're the opposite of people. Well, that is true. This is my reader over here, Sue. Yes.
It's a wonderful job.
Thanks.
Do you write sequentially and you start with an outline, or if something comes to you, you figure out where you're going to fit it in, or what's that?
this is a very interesting question. The writers call it, are you a plotter, which means you write an outline, or are you a pantser, which means you write by the seat of your pants? I have mostly been a pantser, which means it rattles around in my head for a while, and then I sit down and start writing and see what happens and how I fit it in. And it usually means an incredible amount of rewriting, because you start through it and then you go, oh, well, this happened, so I've got to rewrite all of this. And I'm really thinking for the next thing I write, I'm going to see what happens if I plot it. I can manage that. I know. I don't know if I can work. Yeah.
So did this one just take on a life of its own? I mean, did it start and then just...
Yeah, it started, and then I got really interested in who the Bokaaj people were for a while. But the other interesting thing, and Sue can tell you about this, is that Andrea's stepfather is a real pain. Yeah. Yeah. He thinks more houses are good. And she eventually runs away. Because he just sort of wants to keep her safe, which means in the yard, never go out of the yard. And I think it was Sue who said, well, what's his problem? And I said, I don't know. And then I had to figure it out. So, it starts off with a bang, and then there's all the questions and the places where the whole plot falls apart, and things like that. Yeah.
Do you know whether it's a play or a book? What determines?
Tom's laughing because one of my early plays, before I understood how to handle the conversation, and you guys are nice, but some people are just really difficult, and I learned how to handle it. But before that, there was this huge conversation about the play, and then somebody said, well, maybe it should have been a ballet. And I was completely destroyed. Was wrecked. I thought, nobody understands me. But, wait, what was the question? That's your fault.
How do you know whether it's a book or a play?
Oh, right. How do I know that? A play, you need to be able to do a play on a stage. In this case, I needed the woods. This is tricky. So I kind of knew it was a novel. But what happened with the first novel I wrote, because I thought I was a playwright. I am a playwright. I still write plays. One of the characters in the first play I wrote kept doing that thing of pulling on my sleeve and saying, I have more story to tell you. And when I found out what the story was, it was set in a place, a magic place, where the landscape changes as you walk through it, and only a few people can navigate it and not get lost forever. And I'm saying, this landscape is not going on a stage unless I have $5 million, So maybe I'll try writing a novel. So I think in some cases it's just, I don't see how this goes on a stage. And then it's a novel. But I prefer plays. Yeah, that I have never tried to do. That's a whole tricky thing in itself, yeah. Or a ballet. Never tried that either. Yeah.
Did you ever, in the writing, and I know you spent years on this,
Yeah.
was there a point where you said, and threw it in a drawer, or did it always keep you going?
When Craig, the stepfather, had to be thought through, I had to drop it for a while and really think about it. But It was sort of, the main thing I was writing even when well, no, because I was writing Chronic, a play at the same time. I started Siljeea Magic. I worked on it. I started the play. I worked on it. I decided the play really was impossible. I stuck it in a drawer. I figured out what to do with the stepfather. So there are holes. I think if you talk to, every writer is different. We all have how we do it. And, if some writer says, this is the way to do it, don't listen to him. It's the way you do it and the way I do it. Anything else? I have books if you would like one. They are here. And the other thing I have, if you would like a book, I can give it to you for like half price, which is $10. This is a very tiny publisher, so the book has to be expensive. But if you would like a bookmark, you may have a bookmark. These were designed by my friend, Julie Manners, who is a wonderful graphic designer, and designed the first novel that I had that I self-published. 1, 2, and 1. And actually, I have a recipe for acorn flour. Do you know how long it takes to make acorn flour? Yeah, first you have to get the acorns. Yeah. And then you don't really want to eat it, as far as I can tell. So, yeah. Okay, thank you all so much. Oh, is there another? Okay, what?
When I asked you who your audience was,
Yeah.
I was ready to read your book by the time we finished talking.
All right. All
As an
right.
adult.
And you're an adult.
Well, I try to be an adult.
I know. Well, I read stuff like this all the time. Even when I wasn't writing it, so I had to see what there was, I love reading it. In fact, I'm reading a young adult novel now, The Mermaid in Chelsea Creek, as in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Michelle T, like the stuff you drink. And it's about a teenager. And I love it. So, yeah. I'm popping here.
Good writing. I read all of Harry Potter, all the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Totally identified with Andrea. Now in my 70s, So, it's good writing. So, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
what age the character is.
Also, we were all 12.
A long time ago.
Yeah. Okay, books if you want them.